Not sure of what awaits. Wasn't a fan of St. Peter on his gate. But by God I pray that I'll see you in some way.
1 in 3 people will develop dementia in their lifetime. It's a scary statistic, especially for a condition that carries so much fear. But what are some of the myths around Alzheimer's? And are there things that we can do to actively try and reduce the risk of developing it? I'm Amy Griffiths, and on this episode of Island Life, I'll be finding out some of the answers to those questions. I've been speaking to some of the people who work in the field on the Isle of Man and support people living with the condition and their families. Nikki Sinclair is the clinical team lead and occupational therapist at Manx Care. Jeanette Hogg is the lead admiral nurse at the hospice. And Claire Cubberley is the local service manager of the Manx branch of the Alzheimer's Society. I started by asking them what the picture is like here on the Isle of Man.
I think the numbers at the moment approximately, and we can only ever give approximate numbers, that we believe there's around 1,400, that's approximately, people on the Isle of Man. But potentially there may be more like 1,600 to 1,800, but that's people that perhaps haven't gone through a diagnosis process. So, yeah.
And that's quite a large number. I think, it might surprise people to hear that it's that high.
It is a large number, but then I think if you think about demographics on the Isle of Man, obviously we have an increasing, as in a lot of places, older population, and the risk of developing a dementia, I think, increases, as you get older. I think also perhaps on the island, because we are a small island, there is that potential that people are perhaps more aware of getting assessed and diagnosed. So perhaps that also might go to sort of demonstrate sort of some of the larger numbers that perhaps we have on the island.
What exactly is dementia?
Dementia is a progressive condition. It's a condition that it affects the brain processing, and I think a lot of people tend to think immediately of memory and having a poor memory, but there's different aspects to it. So although some of the earlier symptoms might be having a poor memory, perhaps what we call prospective memory, so remembering things like, for example, appointments or things that are out of your normal routine, or short-term memory, remembering conversations you've had perhaps the day before. But other aspects of cognitive decline can be present, and that's what we would look for when we're diagnosing somebody. So things like not being able to problem solve or think abstractly or work out something that's perhaps not within your normal routine, so more complex problems, if you like. It can also affect communication. So sometimes people might start to have difficulties remembering words, or they will use the wrong word, even though they know the word they want to use. They use an approximation of a word. And it can also affect people's day-to-day living tasks. So things that they do around the house day-to-day or out in the community, they might start to forget to do those things, or they might keep doing them, keep repeating them. So sometimes early symptoms might be that someone, keeps going to the shop to buy something because they've forgotten they've already bought it, or they keep turning up for an appointment even though they've been for that appointment already. So there's kind of multifactorial elements, and also it can affect people's behaviour, because sometimes people get quite frightened. They know something's wrong, they don't know what's going on, so they might get anxious, they might get quite depressed or low in mood because they are struggling. They might start to withdraw. They might sometimes get quite frustrated, and family members will sometimes, sort of remark on this, that, that somebody who's always been quite perhaps a relaxed, passive person has become a little bit more agitated at times, or a little bit more frustrated, a little bit more angry. And that's sometimes because, they are struggling with the things they're doing.
And it can be really challenging as a loved one, watching the person that you love and watching this happen to them, can't it? And what are some of the best ways to maintain a really positive relationship with your loved one while all of this is going on?
I suppose this is where some of the support services come in. So we try and offer a smooth process from sort of diagnosis right the way through to end of life. And, there's a Living Well course at the beginning when people get diagnosed that people can attend. There's the CRISP course at the Alzheimer's Society, which is a little bit further on. And then we run a course up at Hospice Your Time, Your Place, which is an 8-week programme to enable carers to have those communication techniques, how to manage some of those difficult behaviours, things like planning ahead for the future, eating and drinking. I know Claire talks about power of attorney with the Alzheimer's courses. So I think between us, we try and cover all aspects and try and offer the support as best we can, and we encourage people to come along to things like the decaf to get support from their peers, people who are in similar situations as well. And obviously looking on things like the Alzheimer's website, the Dementia UK website to get some information. Don't Google anything, that's not the right place for it. But yeah, so I think between us we try and support people as best we can to stay home as long as possible.
Because I think it can be easy to get frustrated, to get emotional when you're watching your loved one who once behaved in a certain way and is now behaving in a different way, and it can be quite a challenge to cope with that, can't it?
Sometimes that's the hardest part for family members, and it's that being able to sort of take a step back and perhaps not, which I think we all automatically do, sometimes it's correct somebody or step in and do something for somebody, but actually sort of look at how you can best support that person. And if they are sort of telling you something that isn't perhaps quite correct, is kind of having that thought, well, is it right to correct that person, or is it just to redirect them and sort of say, well, actually, we were talking about so and so, rather than whatever the subject the person had gone on to. Or obviously within limits, obviously if it's the person's going to do something that you think is perhaps going to be dangerous or a risk to that person, then obviously family members would have to step in. But sometimes it's that being able to take a step back and accepting that perhaps that person's, if you like, reality isn't perhaps what's literally going on around that person at that time. And that can be hard, really hard.
It's easy to focus on it from the perspective of the loved ones, but actually as the person with dementia as well, what can it be like for them? How difficult can it be when you're the person with dementia?
I think frightening. I think it can be very frightening, and certainly people with dementia have written books, they've written poems about that diagnosis and how it feels. Frustrating. I think somebody with the younger onset dementia, it was an American lady, Christine Bryden, talked about, the world becomes full of stop signs, and quite often it's almost like lots of things have to stop for that person. If they're in employment, if they're driving, potentially, people can continue to drive, but some people have to stop driving. So sometimes their roles will change. They've perhaps been grandparents looking after children. So it becomes, I think, quite frustrating, quite frightening, very confusing at times for people as well.
I've heard people say things like the world shrinks as well. And that's both for the person with dementia and the carer, that they find a lot of those social contacts, a lot of those things that we take for granted, going to work, driving your car, are taken away over a period of time. So I think that's why it's really important for people living with dementia to attend wellbeing groups, to attend groups where there's other people in similar situations, and get that peer support, and try and give them a bit of social contact back again and a bit of independence back again where we can.
I know, again, people have spoken about using memory strategies which can support them. And one lady talked about the fact she uses a dictaphone every night to remind her of what she's got to do the next day. And she said, it's exciting. The next day I wake up, I push the dictaphone, and a whole new world is happening for me that day, because I couldn't remember what I'd dictated the day before. So she said every day is a new day. Same with opening drawers. She said, I didn't want labels on my drawers. That's something sometimes we recommend. But she said, I don't want labels. She said, because I quite like opening the drawers and seeing what's inside the drawer. It's a surprise every time. So I think it's sometimes to do with people's approach to their condition as well. So it makes a big difference.
And it's quite often stereotypically thought of as an older person's illness, but actually that's not always the case, is it?
No. We're all a bit like, who should speak on that? No, I think that's one of the things we're talking about in the myth busting. I mean, age is a link, and obviously we have got an ageing population, but we also know that we've got people with young onset dementia on the island. We've got people with rarer dementias, some of the frontotemporal dementias, and it's not just about. There's 14 modifiable risk factors that people can go through to stop them getting dementia or try and prevent it. Things like the amount of things you eat, like so obesity, managing your cholesterol, your diabetes, anything that affects your arteries. If you can reduce that impact on narrowing your arteries, that's going to help your brain health as well. There's things that you wouldn't think of, I suppose, like air pollution is a big link, hearing loss, midlife depression. So there are some things that we can do earlier on to prevent, and we're trying to do some work with public health around that as part of their strategies that are coming on board in the next few months, I believe. But it's just making people aware of what they can do to either prevent it or slow down.
Because I think that's part of it as well, isn't it? I think a lot of people feel like it's something that if you're going to get it, you're going to get it. And there's not really very much you can do about it. And I suppose there is something to be said for that in some cases. But actually, you know, what you're talking about there are things that you can do to actively try and reduce the chances of you getting it at least.
Yeah. And I think it's just making people more aware of those things, because I think there is that misconception that it's an old age disease. But not everyone who is old, shall we say, gets dementia. And we don't know enough about what causes it to change. So everyone gets those changes in the brain as we age. That's part of normal ageing. But not everyone develops dementia. And until we get that link in the research as to what causes some people to develop the change and some people not to develop it, I think that will be absolutely groundbreaking. But I don't think we're at that point, sadly, at the moment. You know, hopefully in our lifetime, we can only hope, can't we? But
I'm Amy Griffiths, and on this episode of Island Life, we're talking about dementia. What is it? Can the risk of developing it be reduced? And what's it like for someone living with the condition? NHS England says dementia is a growing challenge. As the population ages and people live for longer, it's become one of the most important health and care issues facing the world. In the whole of the UK, the number of people with dementia is estimated to be at 850,000, and that's only those who've had a formal diagnosis. As we've been talking about, dementia mainly affects people over the age of 65, and the likelihood of developing it then roughly doubles every 5 years. However, it can develop earlier, presenting different issues for the person affected, their carer, and their family. It's thought 1 in 3 people will care for a person with dementia in their lifetime. Half of them are employed, and it's believed that some 66,000 people in England have already cut their working hours to care for a family member, while 50,000 have left work altogether. There's also a considerable economic cost associated with the disease, which is estimated at £23 billion a year and is expected to triple by 2040. That's more than the cost of cancer, heart disease, and stroke. So it's something that's becoming an increasing issue for our healthcare professionals to deal with. And it's important we know the facts about it. September is Dementia Awareness Month, and one of the key themes this year is myth-busting some of the common misconceptions about it. So I asked Nikki, Jeanette and Claire to tell me about the realities of dementia.
so there is a myth that people think that if my mum's got it or my dad's got it, I'm going to get it. And I think statistically it's something like 5% of people, there is a genetic link. So actually it's a lot lower than we think. So that's one of the big ones. One of the things is around, people say, oh, there's no point getting a diagnosis, for example, because there's no effective treatments for dementia. We would probably counter that and say, whilst there isn't a cure, early diagnosis can provide interventions to slow that progression. There's access to medication to manage the symptoms. There's always treatments for Alzheimer's that are coming along slowly, but, you know, they are in process. And it's about improving quality of life, and people can live well with dementia for several years after a diagnosis, you know, and I think it's just getting that message out there.
We talked a little bit about this earlier, but memory loss is the first sign of dementia. But I think, again, first symptoms can include things like, as I mentioned, communication, word finding difficulties. It can affect actual visual perception, so not actual sort of your distance or your short or long-sightedness, but more how you see things, and, you know, in terms of things like depth perception, so things like slopes and stairs and changes in surfaces can become more difficult for people to perceive. And then again, that then can affect people wanting to go out, wanting to move around. Things like people might start to see things like visual hallucinations. And again, that might be misperceptions of what they're seeing, sort of shadowing in rooms, but it might also be that they're seeing animals or they might be seeing people. But again, that can be quite distressing for people, particularly if they know that they're having these hallucinations because everybody else around them isn't seeing what they're seeing. And again, things like we mentioned earlier, mood and behaviour changes. So again, that's quite often linked to the fact the person knows something's wrong but not quite sure what's going on, and everything seems to be getting harder to do, and things that they perhaps would have done without thinking, they're having to really sort of process and think about doing those things. So that's another myth.
One of the other myths is that life doesn't end with a dementia begins, and as Jeanette was saying, that people can live a good quality of life with an earlier diagnosis. There's medication that can be given to help slow the progress of the disease, and early intervention, knowledge, understanding of what's happening helps them live a quality life, come out, go into groups, social settings, and obviously some of the things that Nikki was just talking about there, about the mobility and seeing things. Whilst you can't take those away, we can help them understand what's happening, which helps them come out and takes away some of the fears when understanding's there. Each person's experience with dementia is different, so each person is a unique person with dementia, and I think that's really important, and that's something in all of our assessments, that we will look at the person, their life history, who they are, what their life has contained, because that will also have an impact on their dementia and how they are presenting with their dementia as well. All people living with dementia have the right to be treated with the respect, and we look at the person as an individual, and it's their name and their person first, not the dementia first. So they're always a Claire with dementia. Dementia doesn't come first, it's always the person. We always look at that person, what they can do, what their wishes are, what they want for their life, and how can we help them make that happen and live a good quality of life with dementia. People living with dementia experience unfair and negative assumptions about their abilities, so we can often de-skill them by doing things for them, because we see them struggling, we see them finding things difficult, and we step in and do it for them, where all they need is a little bit more time, a little bit more patience, and understanding that ways of guiding them rather than taking the task from them. Just giving them gentle prompts means they'll get through the task themselves, and that's part of how we teach carers to approach supporting a person with dementia.
Things like when I go round to my grandparents' house, my grandma always insists on making me a cup of tea, but I have sugar in my tea and she doesn't, so she has to constantly ask me, do you have sugar in your tea? Do you have sugar in your tea? Do you have sugar in your tea? How many sugars do you have in your tea? Where do I put the sugar? And it's things like that, and it takes every ounce of me not to go, I'll just do it, Grandma, don't worry, it's absolutely fine. But actually I know it's really good for her to be able to still do those things, because she can.
Yeah, carry a sugar cube in your pocket and pop it in the cup when she's not looking. One way around it.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's easy solutions to keep that person involved and not amplify the fact that they can't do something. So gentle support means that you can gently help them to carry on doing it, and you don't highlight the fact that they've missed steps on it. A person living with dementia needs help, and it's respectful to ask first and not assume. So it's, would you like help with that? How would you like me to help you? And that's very much how we would approach asking a person, what do they want? How do they want to be supported? And how can we help you live with this disease? So putting them first and their wishes first. And they can still have a sense of purpose and not feel that their lives are over. And that, as Nikki and Jeanette have both spoken about, the low mood that can come with the fear and the anxiety and isolation, then wanting to keep themselves away from other people, and it's giving them a sense of purpose. It might be different to what their sense of purpose was previously, so sometimes their occupation may be something that we can use to help them kind of live with their disease. Other times it's finding a new skill and maybe looking at a skill that hasn't got so much complexity to it, but giving them a sense of purpose, helping them and keeping them involved in everyday life and everyday decisions, not making the decisions on their behalf.
Because you can live with dementia for years, can't you? It's not something that, is going to end your life overnight necessarily. It's something that you could potentially be living with for a long time. So it's important to still have quality of life for those years, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the statistics for Alzheimer's are something like, people can live 10 to 15 years after diagnosis. So I think that, again, that's another myth, isn't it? Dementia is a death sentence, but actually it's not. It's just that we need to make some reasonable adjustments for people to enable them to live that good quality life for several years. Everyone is different, but that's the sort of average for an Alzheimer's diagnosis. So I suppose it's just to reassure people, just because you have that diagnosis, it doesn't mean that your life stops at that point. Embrace it, do things. I mean, there's a lovely blog post by a lady called Wendy Mitchell who had young onset dementia. Very, very honest, and if people wanted to read read it. You know, if you just Google Wendy Mitchell, it comes up. She wrote 3 books during the time that she had dementia. She's absolute inspiration about her journey and what it was like. And I quite often say to carers and people with dementia, you know, if they wanted to read something like that, because actually it was quite positive, you know, quite affirming, and she definitely did things her own way and had that quality of life, you know. So
the key message for anyone who either has dementia or has a loved one living with it is that you are not alone. Help is available to you if you need it, and there are lots of support groups who can help you as you try to navigate your new normal.
Towards the end of the month, what we're planning is a sort of what we call an awareness week. So Claire's probably to tell you a little bit about the session she's going to be doing as Dementia Friends. But we also have a information stall that's going to be based at the C Terminal on Friday the 26th September between 10 and 4 o'clock. It'll be in the sort of entrance hall of the C Terminal, and there'll be representatives from all of our services there with stalls, with information. People can come along, they can come and chat to us. I believe we're going to have a choir, the Forget Me Notes sing-along group are going to come down and sing. And these are people who have, you know, a diagnosis of dementia, or their families, friends will be coming along as well. And it's, again, another way of demonstrating that you can live well with dementia as well. We're having a disco as well the following week on the Tuesday, and that's at one of our memory cafes, our Douglas Decaf Cafe. So it's an afternoon disco, which people that come along to our memory cafes are all invited to. Anybody else can come along as well if they want to, but they usually go down very well, our discos. We usually play music probably from the 60s and 70s, and we normally have a theme. I think the theme this year is sparkles.
Snazzy shirts and sparkles,
yes. Yeah.
So the brighter the better, I think.
Yeah, there's a few things going on.
So the Alzheimer's Society runs what's called Dementia Friends information sessions, and these sessions are awareness sessions for the community, and the aim is that a little bit of knowledge and understanding will help people be emphatic to those with dementia, and we want dementia friendly communities so that we can help people in the community integrate. So we are going to be doing 4 sessions over that week. Wednesday the 24th, we've got an evening session for those that are working and can't access the daytime ones at the Roundhouse. Thursday the 25th of September, we're up in Ramsey, and we're at Ramsey Town Hall in the boardroom. That one's at 1 o'clock, so an afternoon session. And then Monday the 29th, we've got a lunchtime session at Douglas City Library, where people could come and bring a lunch with them. If it's within the lunch hour and they work in town, they could access that one at 12:30. And so if they want to just contact us on 613181, they can book themselves onto the sessions. Some of them are limited in numbers just because of where the space is that they're being delivered. Others are unrestricted. So just contact us and we can see if we can book you on the session.
And I suppose my last question would probably be, if anybody listening is concerned for themselves or for a loved one that they may well have dementia or be showing signs of dementia, what advice would you give them and where should they start?
Usually we would advise people to go and speak to their GP, and the GP will then obviously do some very brief assessments around their memory, but also take a history. They will also undertake some sort of blood investigations and tests, because sometimes there can be other things that can be causing changes in people's sort of memory and cognition, things like infections or other health concerns that may be picked up and can be reversed. So the first point would be going to your GP, and then the GP will, if they feel that it's required, will sort of refer you into the memory service. But the other thing people can do is obviously contact services such as Claire's service, the Alzheimer's Society, to talk things through and get more information.
Yeah, we have at the Alzheimer's Society, we have a symptom checklist that people can access online as well if they want to. So the things we've spoken about are not just memory. There might be other things that people are doing, and they can work through the symptom checklist with a loved one or themselves and have a look and see, am I doing a number of things that maybe are not just the memory issue, and then they can take that along with them to their GP to discuss, because often you get into the GP surgery, you know you're under pressure for time and you may not be able to recall all of the things you need to tell them. So the symptom checklist is a great tool to take along with you to have that discussion with your GP.
It can be really difficult watching the person you love change as they live with dementia, seeing the person you knew them to be disappearing before your eyes. But I do want to be a little bit self-indulgent for a minute and just share a perspective that's really helped me, just in case it can help anyone else who is listening. And I've only really been able to gain that perspective since I became a parent. My little boy is nearly 3 now, and while I love watching him grow up and develop and seemingly change before my eyes, I do miss so much about who he was. His little newborn scrunch, his babble before he could talk, his wobbly walk when he was just learning. All those little moments with him that I will never get back. But that doesn't mean I love who he is now any less. And I love that it feels like I'm constantly getting to know him and learn new things about him. And I feel the same way about my grandma. Of course I miss who she was, but that doesn't mean I love who she is now any less. I just have to adapt my relationship with her and get to know who she is now, in the same way I have to do with my son as he grows up. I'm not sure if that'll make sense to anyone else, but for me, it's really helped me try and maintain a great relationship with my grandma. And at the start of this programme, I said that 1 in 3 people will develop dementia at some point in their life. So there are probably more people currently going through this than you realise. If you want to find out more about how and where to get help, you can visit manxradio.com/support, where there are links and contact details for charities and support groups that can give you more information. I'm Amy Griffiths, and you've been listening to this Island Life special about dementia. You can listen back to this programme at manxradio.com or by subscribing to Manx Radio podcasts using your usual podcast provider.